It's not been a straight line of growth, to say the least. We had an 85% turnover in our staff. We were in a bad spot. We were actually contemplating closing the clinic. Weirdly, and I don't like to say this too often to people, but weirdly, the pandemic was actually really good for us. We've quadrupled the revenue of the business, the gross revenue of the business, and we've more than doubled, almost tripled our staff in that time now. Think how crazy this is. We're 7 years into the business, and number one, we weren't getting regular P&Ls to begin with. And number two, I didn't even know what P&L stood for. I'm not sure whether I want to open a second one, more because I think I have a little bit of PTSD from the first one. I will say that I would never open a clinic from scratch again. Reactivations is a massive source of patients and potential revenue for a business that most clinics never tap into because they don't know how, right? Even though they think they have a process, because we're giving you access into the lifeline of our clinic. We're a very complicated clinic because we're big and we have multiple services. And it's been a lot, but even that side of it has been smoother than I would have expected. I would have expected a lot more hiccups, challenges, questions, concerns along the way. You need to just see some of the patients because they would come into the clinic and you're like, man, I haven't seen this guy in 4 years. We just had one. I haven't seen him since 2019. And so that part was really cool. And now, as you know, we've now made the switch out of the 12-month plus group and we're now in that 6-month plus group. And we've already seen, even just shifting that 6 months, it went from, in a week having X number of people come back in the clinic to now having Y, except Y is 2 times X.
Great. Geoff, thank you so much for being with us. We are here on this topic with all about your journey to and through the beginnings of NHRC, which will be really exciting. And I think I'm also very excited because you are our first partner in Canada. And so I think there's going to be a lot to learn about what does it mean to run high volume healthcare operations in Canada, which will be very different, and maybe some similarities to the other practices that we work with and folks that we speak with. Thank you for being here. Maybe just kick off. Would love for you to introduce yourself, tell folks a bit about who you are and what NHRC is.
Sure. So first off, thanks for having me here. So obviously my name's Geoff Gamble. I am a chiropractor, and NHRC, or Niagara Health Rehab Center, is, I'd say, a fairly large multidisciplinary clinic here in Canada. We started off with 4 practitioners and about 4,000 square feet, and now we are about 7,000 square feet, and we have about 27 staff, four of which are an admin team. So
sounds like growth.
Yeah, but it has not been a straight line of growth, to say the least. I guess we went just a little bit of the backstory. The clinic started, we opened our clinic August 1st of 2012. It started with 4 of us in the clinic, myself, my business partner, Paul, who's a kinesiologist. We started off as the 2 full-time practitioners, and then we had a part-time massage therapist and another part-time chiropractor. And then we were, I'd say, fortunate. We kind of grew organically for about 5 years, where we made lots of connections out in the public. We spent a lot of time doing those outreach opportunities, and we just sort of grew and added staff. We were very fortunate. We only turned over, I think, 1 or 2 staff members in the first 5 years of the clinic. So we, as a lot of, say, business owners kind of roll out down that path, we thought we were great and we thought we were doing everything awesome. And we started trying to take our hands off of it a little bit, and kind of in that mentality of the clinic's in a good spot, it should be able to run itself. And over the next, I'm going to say 18 months, we had an 85% turnover in our staff. Our growth in our clinic flatlined. And in fact, we actually regressed heading into the second year. And that was about 2018, 2019, somewhere kind of around that area. And we were in a bad spot. We were actually contemplating closing the clinic. The second year, I think we were losing a little bit of money. And it wasn't until we stepped back, talked to some people, and realized that we actually needed some help in how to run the business that we started seeing growth again. So we ended up working with a company that actually does specifically helps rehab clinics in the business side of stuff. And so that company, it's called Clinic Accelerator. It's a company, not that I'm trying to plug other companies, but they really, Yeah, and honestly, they've been great. And I've actually started in the last couple of years, I've actually started working for them as well. So, but then the pandemic hit. And of course, everybody in the pandemic, everybody got shut down. It suffered. But for us, weirdly, and I don't like to say this too often to people, but weirdly, the pandemic was actually really good for us because it gave us an opportunity to do like a big reset in the clinic. It allowed us to change a lot of our operations. It allowed us to reevaluate the staff that we had at the time and to really figure out whether where we were at that point was the direction we wanted to go. And, of course, we were completely shut down for 3 months here in Canada. And then for the next 3 months, we were on reduced capacity, as most clinics across the world were. And even with all of that and the coaching that we were receiving that time, we actually saw a 16% growth in 2020 versus 2019. And at that point, we were really, I think we had about 10 staff maybe at that time. But then since then, because of the changes we made and just recognizing you have to run your business differently, we've quadrupled the revenue of the business, the gross revenue of the business, and we've more than doubled, almost tripled our staff in that time now. So we've been very fortunate and we've had a pretty good growth curve after the pandemic. But the first, I'm going to say like the first 7 years, we thought we were doing really well and then hit a real plateau and kind of we're starting to head down a crash point. So
I mean, there's a lot that I sort of want to pull out from that. One thing that is very obvious, and also because you work together, it's obvious, but it's obvious just because of the language that you're using. You are talking about the journey that you've been on with the clinic using business language, revenue quadrupled, staff turnover. Obviously, there's a huge part of your practice is clinical in nature. We're not necessarily focused on that here, but I am curious on a personal level. You came into NHRC as from a clinical background, and you became an entrepreneur after you became a clinician. You started this journey.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I guess you told us a bit about the clinic's journey from a commercial perspective, but how about the Geoff journey from a commercial perspective? Like, what is your journey as an entrepreneur clinician where you've sort of gone from 4 people, opening it up, probably seeing every patient, doing 99% of the jobs firsthand, hand to mouth sort of stuff. And now you've got a much bigger staff. You're thinking about it differently. You're thinking about it as a machine. What has been your sort of, your own skill evolution, intellectual evolution about how you're thinking about this as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. And I think like my journey as an owner, I think really mirrors a lot of or parallels a lot of what other clinic owners go through, right? We start off as a clinician. You do well as a clinician. Obviously you're well enough that you're like thinking to open your own place. And then you open the clinic and you do this, like, even before you open the clinic. And my business partner sort of said this to me the one day is like, you do a bunch of napkin math and
it all makes sense.
Oh yeah, look at all this extra. Yeah. Look at all this extra money I can make. And, so you do this, you open the clinic and you're working, you go from working, 30 or 40 hours a week as a clinician, not as an owner, to working 60 hours a week as an owner or 70 hours a week, but you're making the same amount of money, at least gross revenue, but you're actually taking home less money. Right. And that was what happened in the beginning. And we were fortunate that we actually did grow in that initial part and we were able to hire some staff and whatnot. But like now looking back on it, we made some of the most basic mistakes. Like I was a chiropractor and the first thing we did was hire another chiropractor, even though like I wasn't full, right? Like just a classic mistake, right? So I would say for me personally, that first like 4 or 5 years, we thought we were doing really well, but I personally was responsible for like 50% of the revenue of the business as the chiropractor. And, in the bank account, I'm going to say that looks okay, but for my own sanity, it was not. And then it wasn't until we started working with this coaching company that you start realizing 2 things. Number one is that's just completely not sustainable. Like I don't want to be working 60, 70 hours as I'm going through life and with kids and family and all that stuff. Number one. Number 2 is that when at some point down the road, we want to exit the clinic, it's actually a detriment that I'm such a high percentage of the clinic. And then the last part, and I think for me personally, is that I was actually starting to just like crash and it was noticeable.
Of course.
Stopped caring. And that was actually part of the problem that happened with the clinic when we were going through that like flat line and that decline, is that I was just disengaged from the clinic, like in terms of like the business of the clinic. I just came in, treated, and went home. I would say that the next big part from there is once we started, I'm going to say, viewing the business like a business and not just a place where a bunch of therapists work. My change was starting to understand, how do you actually look at the business in that way? So looking at metrics of the business, looking at, how do we grow our other staff so that I actually don't have to work that much? And that was a huge, huge learning curve, because I'm a chiropractor. I'm not a business person. And when you start talking in business, even simple things like business language, like a P&L, like think how crazy this is. Like, so we're 7 years into the business, and number one, we weren't getting regular P&Ls to begin with. And number two, I didn't even know what P&L stood for. And we're 7 years into the business. I didn't even know what that meant. Right. And part of that was because I never took an interest in learning it, but also because we're opening clinics, we're doing everything on the cheap. Right. So it's like, my father-in-law was my accountant. The bookkeeper that he had was our bookkeeper. She was doing it for us kind of on the side at a discounted rate. So all those business pieces of advice you would get from other professionals, we didn't get. And we also didn't know to even seek it out. So I think that's where the big piece was learning how to run the business like a business. And then also understanding how important like the people in your business are and the culture of the business itself.
Makes perfect sense.
Once we started learning about that stuff, then I was able to actually start taking steps back from my treating and focusing more on actually running the business. It's that cliche saying, right? I was spending too much time in the business, not enough time on the business. So this was allowing me to spend more time on the business.
My light just went off, so in 1 second, Aaron, but the light trying to do that. Hopefully that gets a little bit brighter. That makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, the providers that we work with, they range in size. So usually starting at about $1 million in turnover, depending on what currency you're working in, and then going up, all the way to 10, 15 million, 20 million groups, etc. And what we find is that there are these like 2 or 3 key inflection moments. The first one is the one you just described, which is where the clinician entrepreneur goes, the person goes from being clinician to being entrepreneur. The clinician entrepreneur goes from clinician to entrepreneur. That's that sort of first transition where they say, okay, there's enough running where I'm going to keep my finger in the patient pot because I want to be close to patients. I want to understand what it's like to be front line, but it's probably the minority of my time and certainly the minority of my energy. Most of my energy is nothing but the business. So it sounds like that's sort of the journey that you went on. And then we usually see come after that is, okay, now we figured out the playbook for, single site flagship profitability. And now the question is, well, can we do number 2? Can we do number 3? And try and like replicate the playbook. And as a result, take some cost out because now we're doing it in multiple locations, scale of volume goes up. I am sort of curious. We just did a little bit of a journey, sort of the past to now, and it sounds like it has been a journey. Do you have a sense of what you think the future of the NHRC story is in terms of, great, now you have that stability, you're still sort of doing some of that tightening, trying to do that optimization in the clinic, but where does it go next? Like what is the next chapter? If you've just done chapter 1 and 2, what's chapter 3?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and it is definitely one that a lot of clinic owners go through, right? Because they get to this point, and the question really becomes, do I maximize and optimize a single location to like the nth degree? And for us, that's an interesting piece because we're a 7,000 square foot clinic. So our possibilities are, like we're pretty endless, right? Like we've been, I don't know if fortunate is the right word or not, but like we've never had to like be super efficient with like our rooms, right? Because we have 14 private training rooms plus a 2,500 square foot gym, fully equipped gym. So we don't have to worry about, okay, it's got to be 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. And, this person comes in at this shift and this person comes in at this shift. Like right now, our full-time practitioners, they have their own training room, right? Because we can manage that. But down the road, if we wanted to go down that path, we would have to start optimizing more. So that's scenario one. Scenario two is things are going pretty well here. We're pretty optimized. We have good processes and whatever in place. And now we want to go to that second location. To be honest, we've kind of gone down both paths in terms of conversation. I'm not sure whether I want to open a second one, more because I think I have a little bit of PTSD from the first one. So it's right. And of course, the journey would be totally different in the second one because we have a lot of different stuff in place. But I would say that I'm a little bit gun shy to open a second location. And it's not to say that it's not on the radar, but I think it would be something that me personally, and I know my business partner, him and I are really on the same page on this. I think unless something fell in our lap where it was like, this is a good opportunity, somewhere that's established a little bit more that we could walk into and optimize it. I think right now our focus is just to keep optimizing what we have. But there have been some opportunities that have started to pop up. And I think part of that is because we've been around long enough now and that people know who we are. And so when they're considering exiting, they're like, hey, so if you guys, yeah, she may have an interest in this. So while I'm going to say superficially, I'm like, no, I'm not really looking down to open the second one. I'm going to hedge that a little bit with, it could, right?
It's interesting. Go ahead. Sorry.
I will say that I would never open a clinic from scratch again, though.
Interesting. Yeah. So sort of growth through acquisition might be a different sort of journey. There's an interesting thing happening in some of the MSK practices that we work with in the UK. A lot of consolidation in industry right now. In the UK, at least, there are new, micro PE groups springing up right, left, and center, looking to buy and build. And it's interesting because one of the huge, I think, motivators for those rolling up, those acquiring, is what lift is possible in the clinic that's already there. Like, to your point, single site optimization. And I think more often than not, and we actually spoke recently with one of the directors at M&A at a MSK private equity group. And he said very often that optimization is not on the cost side of the house. So it's not like you're going to buy your medical supplies at 20% less. There's usually not much breathing room on the cost side of the house. It's usually on the revenue side of the house. Like, how do you optimize diary? How do you make sure that you're at capacity and do some of that work? And he said the difference in his experience of acquiring a calendar optimized practice versus a calendar not optimized practice is meaningful. You really get the lift when you have that. And what sounds really interesting about NHRC is that because of the size of the space that you're in, you actually have huge headroom. Things are going well, and there's alpha inside the same site. You don't need to go to a new four walls. You've already got that breathing room, which is not always the case, I think, for people who have gone through the journey that you've been on. Maybe they started in a smaller site. They haven't had the opportunity to grow in the same way, which is really interesting. And a bit unusual, I think. Maybe not in Canada, but in the UK, you wouldn't see people start out in that size facility from day one.
Well, I think part of it where we have been very fortunate is, so our original site was 4,000 square feet, which is still big for a startup. But at the same time, our unit, so in the plaza that we're in, the unit that we have, it's actually 10,000 square feet from front to back. What we were fortunate with is the landlords with us, they actually allowed us to split it down. So we originally, and it was, and I'm going to say they allow us to split down, but the way the unit was set up is there was already a built out section at the front, like it was a call center. So there was a built out section in the front, and then there was a warehouse section in the back. So when we took the original 4,000 square feet, that was the call center port. And then when we did our first, I'll say like major expansion, what happens in 2017 or 18, we took on a part of the warehouse, and there's still an additional 3,000 square feet that if we ever wanted, we could take it, which by the way, we're never doing, but you could.
But you've got 100. Yeah. It's so interesting. And to hear you talk about property, I remember when I opened a clinic in London, you start, I mean, I know nothing about property. I come from property background. When you start fitting out a clinic, you learn some things about property that did not you would ever know when you don't come from property background. So it sounds like 4,000 to 7,000 and the journey there gives you, a minor qualification in property by virtue of being a clinic owner, which is very cool. I am curious when you think about that, you said you did that first big expansion. I guess it was 4,000, 7,000 square feet. How did you know that was the time? Like, what were the signals in the clinic that were telling you, okay, it's time to, like, we're reading the room, it's time to go?
Yeah. Yeah. This is a really interesting question. So the short answer to that is we didn't have any signals.
Perfect.
The longer answer to that is we had a personal trainer that was working with us, and we thought he was going to be a long-term fit in the business. And at the time when we had 4,000 square feet, we had about a 800 square foot gym. And he had come to us and basically said that he wasn't really able to do team training because the gym was too small. So we're like, oh, okay, well, we've got all this space to expand, so let's expand. And that's what we did. There was no, because let's keep in mind, like 2017, 18 was prior to when we had any knowledge in the business side of the business. So we were just like, cool, let's do that. Because again, if you throw some more napkin math down, we're like, okay, you can work with this number of teams, you can see this many people. Yeah, it just makes sense. But, that was in 2018, 17, 18. And by December of 2019, that guy had left our clinic. And so now we have this big open space, and we didn't have a trainer that was, really invested in the team and trying to grow his business within our business. Right. So we didn't really have any signals. It was just kind of a fly by the seat of your pants type of scenario. And we didn't know. And it was a near $100,000 expansion. And it was like, we took on a lot, and then we lost the person who was supposed to be utilizing it.
Yeah. I can see why, the reality of that expansion and the promise of that expansion did not necessarily line up in the short term, but probably in the longer term it did, but never easy to get there. So now, okay, got it. So now I understand where it started. I think I have a better sense of where it is now. You just used the phrase, that was before we had any understanding of the business side of the business side of the clinic. And so you were making decisions in a different way. It sounds like the way you're making decisions now is different than the way you were making decisions. For probably number one, like less napkin math as like a baseline, more math and less math. Big change.
Yeah.
What are the other, one or two, top three, you pick, things that have changed in how you make a decision now as a clinic business owner, as opposed to whatever was going on before?
Yeah. So I'll kind of give you what our top two are. So the top two, one is on how we recruit and hire. And the second one is actually looking at metrics within our business and following those metrics on a regular basis. So, and you'll know this, having worked with a number of clinic owners, is that a lot of clinic owners, their way of tracking their business is, at the end of a month, I look at the bank account and I go, cool, there's money in the bank. And then I pay all my bills and I go, hey, cool, there's still some money in the bank. We're winning. Right. And what we learned is that a month is too long. When you start looking at things on a monthly basis, you've missed an entire month of opportunity to make change. You also have missed any time when something is going sideways. You've missed that opportunity, or at least you've delayed the opportunity to right the ship. So we track our metrics on a weekly basis now, and every single week we're looking at them, making a decision. Are we going the right way? What is falling down? What needs to be picked up? Those things. So I'd say that was the first thing. And we make decisions more based on those types of metrics, utilization rates and those things. And then the second one is recruiting and hiring. When we first were hiring, I like to say our clinic was a resume clinic. You send me your resume, your CV, it looks good. Oh, cool, you have some neat experience. We have one conversation with you. You sound like you're a nice person. We hire you. What we learned in that process is that people can really hide who they are in a first interview. And we hired some people in the clinic who, at the end of the day, they just weren't good fits in the clinic, but they also created a very toxic environment or very toxic culture in the business, which then took people who were good fits in the business and made them not good fits in the business because they got kind of jaded by what they're hearing from other people. Now what we do, and this is so funny when you think, well, people go to school for all these years to become a practitioner, and this is what our hiring criteria is turned into. Are you teachable? Do you want to learn? And do you connect and communicate well with people? And if you can have those things, then I can help create or turn you into or teach you to be a good practitioner. And the way I sort of always say with people is, I could teach you to be a good chiropractor. I can't teach you to not be an asshole or to not be a jerk.
I remember I had some friends who went into consulting ages ago after university. And I remember when they were then hiring their next, cohort of new starters who were earlier in their career, they used to say, people think the hiring criteria is where you went to school, what you did. In reality, the hiring criteria is smart, humble, and hungry. Like smart, humble, hungry. If you're smart, humble, and hungry, like 9 out of 10 times it's a hit, but you have to be all three of those things. You have to have the smarts to figure it out. You have to be humble to realize that you're going to have to do things differently, change, learn, evolve, teachable, right? As you just said. And you have to be hungry in the sense of like, it's not always going to come for free. There's got to be some work ethic on it. So that's interesting to your hiring. One of the things I want to double click on, partly because it's sort of how we came into collaborating, but also because I remember when I was running clinic, this was also one of the things that changed for me was this idea of what am I going to own in-house? What's going to be part of my core business, and like where are we going to look elsewhere? And I know that when we started clinic, we assumed that we would outsource marketing and insource this thing and outsource that thing and insource this thing. And then we changed a lot of that as time went on. We realized actually, no, we marketing in-house. We want to let that go. We don't need this part. It's too hard, but actually this part's really important. And I'm curious, and the journey you've been on, how, if at all, has that perspective changed? This idea of these are the things we're going to hold really, really close to the chest, and no one's going to touch it. It's part of the the secret sauce in-house. But actually, these other things are really hard to do in-house, or we're not well said. But how has your sort of perspective changed on those things?
Yeah. So, the biggest hindrance in all that was, I'm a control freak. So the biggest hindrance in the initial phase is that I wanted everything in-house because I wanted to have a hand on everything. And that included like marketing, social media, accounting and bookkeeping, although we did have that, I'll say sort of outsourced, scheduling, training, like all those pieces were all in-house initially. And number one reason, because I said, I'm a control freak, so I want to have my hands on it. But the second part of it was because we just couldn't afford it. You couldn't afford to go outside of the business to pay somebody to do your marketing because we just spent all this money to open the business. As we started running through the process, and to be honest, like where a big change in that came for us is when we started working with Clinic Accelerator and getting coaching. And at that initial conference that we went to, which was in 2019, actually it's June of 2019, I just had a social media, like Facebook memory or whatever.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. Yeah. And what happened in that scenario, we were there and there was a guy that presented, and they called him the god of Google. That's what they call him. But he basically does Google-based services, for rehab clinics. Like that is all he does. That's their niche. And my business partner, he was like, we should contact this guy. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm going like, bro, we have no money to do that, right? But he contacted him. We had a really good conversation with him. We started working with their company, and that and Clinic Accelerator, at least at this current moment, were the two single biggest inflection points in our business that changed the direction of how we as a clinic have grown. But that was our first like foray into really outsourcing something. So we outsourced all of our Google stuff. So it was our SEO, our advertise, or our Google marketing, or our Google ads, our Google My Business, like all of that stuff, all got outsourced to them. And for us, and I want to say, like, I want to be careful because I know other clinics that have worked with marketing companies and not have the same experience we did, but has been and continues to be a huge point for us and a huge marketing avenue for us. So marketing was the first one. Then bookkeeping became our next one because we weren't getting what we needed from my father-in-law's doing it on the side for us. Yeah. Well, and we love her. She was great, but at the same time, like, she was very old school. I mean, she was using QuickBooks from like 2015 because she didn't want to update her computer or whatever it was, right? So we then started looking for a new bookkeeping company. Well, then we went to one bookkeeping company, and that went like a total train wreck because they just didn't really know how to handle a clinic. We ended up with another bookkeeper who then we had the bookkeeping company, but we were working with a specific bookkeeper. Well, then that company started outsourcing everything offsite, so overseas. And the challenge in that was not because they were off like overseas, it was because we never had the same bookkeeper, right? So we originally started with one, but then when they started offsiting, we were working with different people all the time, and it was just like didn't have an understanding about our business. Then we ended up with the one that we're with now, and she's awesome, but she works independently, so she's on her own, but she knows us, she knows our business, and she really helps guide us. So bookkeeping was the next big one. And then, and I'd have to say probably like really the next big evolution has been jumping in and starting to work with Coherent, right? Because we really, and this is like in our first conversation, we understand like, reactivation and all those things. And we think we have a process, or we thought we had a process. And on paper, we have a process, just like every clinic on paper, they have a process. But the reality of it is that even though we have 4 full-time admins, our admins can't touch into our 18,000 person patient list, at least not in the older stuff, because they're just stuck in the day to day. And I know we've had a number of conversations about this, is that we can't do that. And yet reactivations is a massive source of, patients, potential revenue for a business that most clinics never tap into because they don't know how. Right. Even though they think they have a process.
Yeah. And
so I would say like, these have been the big things that we've really I'm going to say like outsourced now, that when we started, we never did.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You use the distinction, and I completely agree with you, by the way. We think we do it and we do it. There is a big gap, not just in reactivation recall, but just all over healthcare provider operations. There are these huge assumptions. The C-suite, the director said, this is the SOP for this, so we're going to do it. But there's no way to have accountability in that SOP. I mean, the number of times we're on a call with a practice manager and a clinic owner, and the clinic owner will say, the practice manager will say, we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And the clinic owner will turn to them and say, but how many times does that actually happen? And then there's this sort of like awkward giggling where it's like everybody knows it kind of doesn't happen, but it's written down, and so it must happen. So I know even from my time in clinic as well, just the assumption that we have a deposit taking process. Nobody gets booked in unless they've made a deposit. How many appointments last month didn't have a deposit? Oh, 36%. Yeah. But we have a process. How could that be the case? Yeah. Because life's not that easy and not that clean. I think makes sense. That's really interesting.
But the other one, so a great example for this is so we have a follow-up process. Our follow-up process and our reactivation process are different, right? So our follow-up process is somebody came in today, they're supposed to book an appointment for next week. They haven't booked an appointment because they need to look at their calendar or whatever. The way our process works is, so let's say that was on a Monday. Well, the therapists don't know until the following Monday because our admin team print out a list. They give it to each of us as therapists. We go through it, call this person, don't call this person's going to discharge, whatever. That's on a week later. And then we give it back to the admin team. They call by end of day Tuesday, they've made that first contact point. Then the next step of that is supposed to be the therapists are then reaching out on by end of day Thursday. Well, you know as well as I do that therapists absolutely hate doing that. And if you're fortunate and you're busy enough, they don't really have the time to do that because they're treating people, right? That's what you hope. So let's assume that they actually made that contact on Thursday. Then the follow-up contact that is the following Tuesday. Well, now we've gone 2 full weeks since that patient's been in the clinic and they're gone. And they're not, and this isn't even a revenue piece. Like, and we tell this about people, like, yes, there's a revenue piece to it. But the other part is you're just not providing good care, right? If you want somebody to get better and you want the best outcomes possible for them, they should be in the clinic getting treated.
It's rewarding and scary to hear you say that, because we were even actually earlier today, long story short, we are involved in a grant process right now with a few healthcare providers to try and pursue a certain area of research. And we're talking about impact. What is the impact of ultimately patient engagement, retention, et cetera? And we keep coming back to the fact, it's like, yes, we can look at this through the lens of revenue and commerciality, and there is a truth in that. And people don't complete their clinical journey. A lot of people don't. That creates an enormous inefficiency and burden on healthcare provider systems. And we're looking at this in the context of the NHS in the UK, which is a huge healthcare provider. If you get someone 50% of the way through a clinical journey and they drop off and they have to come back in 6 months' time or 12 months' time and restart, you have just consumed inefficiently 50% of the clinical pathway. And it is not good for the patient, and it is really not good for the provider, because now they're doing 1.5 times the care to deliver one outcome. And this is bad. I mean, you talk about napkin math that doesn't work. That is napkin math that does not work. And I think it's absolutely the case that it's too easy to say, oh yeah, reactivation is important because it's a revenue issue. It is a revenue issue. It is also a care-based issue. You need to keep people through the journey. These are ultimately outpatient care. And like, you go home, and just like you want someone to do their exercises or take their medication or whatever it might be, they need to continue with the journey. They need help getting there. And we always say, you don't understand who you're competing with when they walk out of the clinic. You're competing with Netflix. You're competing with Meta and with YouTube. This is your competition. It's not the clinic down the road. Your competition is companies that are operating, over billions and billions and billions of people with unlimited resources to grab attention. You have to be able to compete with them. That is a very uphill battle for a healthcare provider. It's a really hard thing to do.
Well, I think the other challenge, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, is for whatever reason, I think that people feel that outcomes and revenue can't coexist, right? They feel like, and you do see this, like when it's very difficult to go to a therapist and talk to them about this person should be in the clinic because it drives revenue in the business, right? Because therapists want to they want to treat people. So, but as the business owner, you have to be concerned about revenue. Like, yes, we want outcome, but you also have to have a viable business. And I think sometimes people don't recognize that those two things, they can and they do coexist, right? If you're providing great outcomes for your patients, it drives the revenue of the business because they got great outcomes. They're going to refer people into the business. They're completing their treatment plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But I think sometimes, it's a little bit, I think clinic owners specifically, we feel like it's a little bit taboo to talk about those two as they coexist with each other. But unfortunately, they do. They have to. They're completely tied to each other.
100%. And we lean very heavily on the reference and metaphor of a restaurant, which at the end of the day, as the executive chef, you may only care about providing, delivering great food. But the reality is, if you deliver great food, you are going to run a very profitable restaurant. It is unavoidable. People will come back for the food. They will refer their friends to the food. You don't get to just sit there and make food and then ship bad food. It just doesn't work. And I think you're right. Like, the quality of provision and the outcome of the business are inextricably linked. And then the same is true in a healthcare context as well. So I completely agree. I'm conscious of time, and sorry, go ahead.
Well, as you say, the other part, and that is also linked to that, it's not just, so even the restaurant, you talk about this, it's not just a great food, but it's a great experience, right? And we talked about that in the clinic. It's, we can provide great outcomes, but if they walk out the door and they had a great outcome with a shitty experience or a crappy experience, I don't know if we're going to be swearing on this, but bad, right? They walk out and it doesn't matter they had a good outcome, because the outcome is only one component of what happens in the entire journey, right? And that was something that we, in the clinic, we had to like really focus on, as you talked about the culture of the business within the staff, but then also had to be like, guys, you have to realize that when the patient comes in the door, they have to have good touch points all the way along the way. right from the first time they find our ad or they find our website, it has to be, easy to navigate, quickly for booking. Then they come in, the intake process has to be nice. They have to have a good, like a good greeting when they walk in the door. The therapist needs to speak to them properly, get a good treatment, and then get a nice experience when they walk out the door, right? So, and we as a clinic, and I think clinics as a whole, we undervalue how important our admin team is at the front, right? They're the lowest paid people in the clinic, yet they're the person who sees every single person that comes through the door. And they're also the first person that sees them and the last person that sees them. So they can make or break an entire process. And yet they're often the lowest paid people and the least, and I hate to say this, but the least respected people in the clinic, right? And so we've tried to make a change in that. I mean, obviously, like there's therapists are going to, have more revenue generation. They're going to take home more money. But at the same time, we still try to make sure the admins are compensated as best we can, and that they're respected in the clinic as a working part of the team, like an entire working part of the team.
Makes perfect sense. And I remember being in clinic, one of the big realizations for me, X number of months, years into it, was reception is actually your revenue owner. And you can deliver 5 stars, you can deliver 10 stars in the treatment room. If they walk out and that last experience is not where it needs to be. And we had a case actually just this morning with a different MSK practice that we support, by coincidence, also MSK. A patient had reached out with a question that went to the front desk. We followed up with them unrelated to that, saying, hey, we've seen you in a while. How are things? They said, oh, actually just reached out with this question. Nobody got back to me. That patient, there's a patient unsupported, not to mention a revenue loss for the clinic, but that patient unsupported. So I think that front layer, it's yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's mission critical, a control tower, and oftentimes not really thought about. I'm in the time we have left, Geoff. I would we touched on it a little bit earlier, and I would value, unrelated to the business of a clinic. Actually, maybe we'll sort of wrap that part up now, so we don't sort of mix wires. I think it's really interesting to hear the story. I know that other clinic owners in MSK and beyond, I think, will probably connect with parts of the story you share, particularly that intellectual and skills-based journey from going from I'm a clinician and running a business to I'm an entrepreneur who's doing some clinical work. And I think that's an exciting journey to be on, and curious to obviously see how it plays out in the next couple of years. So I will always ask the question, if in the next 4 years we had this conversation again, what will be the same for NHRC and what will be different?
Great question. I would say the piece that would be the same is we want to continue to maintain a strong culture in our business. So we want our staff to like working at the clinic, want to come in and work here, have fun in the clinic, but also have fun out of the clinic. Like we do a lot of like staff outing stuff. Every month we do a staff social event every month. So I think that's a big piece. I would say where we really want to continue to evolve and change over the next little while is increasing the efficiencies in the clinic. I think initially, I mean, when you first open the clinic, it's a train wreck. So like there's, anything makes it positive, right? Any move in the right direction is positive. But I would say now we're at a point in the clinic, and my business partner and I talked about this recently, is that we don't think anything major right now. We're not making any categorical shifts in the clinic, right? We're not suddenly, moving heaven and earth in the clinic. The one area that we were missing, and that I think we'll dive into momentarily, is that was the reactivation piece, and that, working with a company like Coherent to help us in that section. So I'd say as we move through over the next number of years, it's going to be how do we continue to focus in the growth in that area and also increase the efficiencies with operations within the clinic. I don't think for us, our next thing is not trying to acquire more patients. We have I would say a pretty healthy new patient flow in our clinic. We typically average about 50-ish new patients a week in our clinic, which for an MSK clinic of our size in Canada is pretty substantial, right? So now it's trying to fix the inefficiencies. And that's what I would say. I hope over the next few years that we optimize that really well and continue to, and truthfully, it's part of it's to cut cost from like marketing and those things, because those efficiencies have been rectified, or
Had just,
inefficiencies.
it sounds just lots of tightening. Keep trying to,
Yeah.
to just sort of bolt on. It makes perfect sense. Well, I think we can close that part off. So I'll just sort of tail it off and say, for those interested, Geoff is Canada-based, running NHRC, also doing, it sounds like, business coaching, supporting other MSK leaders who are thinking about that growth journey for themselves. So I'm sure he would be very happy to hear from you if you had any questions or want to share best practices
For sure.
across different sides of the Atlantic. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I would love, just in the few minutes we have left, to dive into and sort of leave that, so the business of a clinic at the side, and think a bit more about the journey that we've been on together, because we started chatting, I think it was November, December of 2025, first interaction, I think, or just after New Year. Then a couple months later, we finally got things going. So it would be great to hear a bit about the journey we've been on together. How has that looked for you? What should others expect? What has worked well for you? Just the honest version. We don't need to dress it up.
Yeah, no, it's actually it's a great point, because so I'll tell you how it ended up, and the reason why I know it was in the new year, I know it was in January of this year, is because I first came across you and this podcast on Spotify while I was on a cruise over Christmas holidays, because I was running on a treadmill and just being like, I just need something to listen to. So I literally searched Spotify running a clinic, or like clinic operations or something along those lines, and this podcast came up. So I started listening to it, and while I'm listening to it, I'm like, yeah, that's us. Yeah, that's us. Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah, we're missing that. Ah, shit. Right. So then I connected with, I think I connected with you on LinkedIn, I think is how it initially started. And so it just started exploring that. We obviously set up an exploratory call, and we just started working through the process. Now, I will say, for us, one of the things that we do now that we didn't do historically when we were much a less mature clinic, was we really take our time now and really try to figure out, like, is this a good move for us? Is it worth the investment? Is it a good fit? And so we had a number of different calls. We also had a lot of irons in the fire at the time. So, we probably intentionally dragged our feet a little bit on it. But once we pulled the trigger and started working with you guys, the process has been way smoother than I expected it to be truthful. It's a hard one, because I know you understand this, is that, we're giving you access into the lifeline of our clinic. And, so we were very, I don't say hesitant, but we were like, just pump the brakes. Like, we wanted to, like, make sure that things were running in a smooth way. And this is not to say that you guys were trying to put the pedal on the floor. And in fact, you guys worked with us understanding that that's kind of how we wanted to work. So that part of it was like really good. It's been much smoother in getting people on board. Like Sonia, who we work with, she's been great. She's been working hard with us. We're a very complicated clinic because we're big and we have multiple services. And it's been a lot. I know it's been a lot for Sonia to take on. But even that side of it has been smoother than I would have expected. Like, I would have expected a lot more hiccups, challenges, questions, concerns along the way. So that part has been really good. And I think you and I, or you, Coherent and NHRC, has been very aligned in how we want to start, bringing the process forward. It wasn't like here's everything we do and we want to do it all at once. It's, let's slowly bring this in and make sure that, SOPs are in line. The information is there. Any of these like hitches and hiccups we get ironed out before we start going into the hotter part of the patient base. Right. And we did. And we started in I know you like to call it the ice bucket, but we we started in that very cold part of our patient list. And, and it was really neat to just see some of the patients, because they would come into the clinic and you're like, man, I haven't seen this guy in like 4 years. We just had one. I haven't seen him since 2019, just came into the clinic. And so that part was really cool. And now, and as you know, we've now made the switch out of the 12-month plus group, and we're now in that 6-month plus group. And we've already seen, even just shifting that 6 months, it went from, in a week having X number of people come back into the clinic to now having Y, except Y is like 2 times X. So that part for me has been very exciting, especially looking at what we hope as we continue to move down the process. And yeah, and sort of shifting down the pathway and having Coherent more involved, but earlier in the journey. I'm quite excited about that part of it. But I would say to encapsulate all that, it's been way smoother than I expected to be. And the Coherent team is just exceptionally responsive, which for me as a person who's a little bit type A, I have a huge appreciation for that, where, something needs to get done. I send a message, it basically gets done, even though we're, 5-hour time difference apart. Right. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy to hear that. I know that, I think it was someone on your team who mentioned this, and I think you probably echoed it as well. You're absolutely right. There's a huge extent, you have to extend a lot of trust. Party that you don't know. It's very different than working with a marketing agency. A lead is a lead. You don't have a relationship with these people. You're letting someone really into the house. So we certainly appreciate that. I think, for one of the things that's been so helpful, you say you're a bit type A. I think everyone on our team is a bit type A. And so to work with a clinic that is, who's just like really on it, and you guys are really on it, it makes our life really easy and enjoyable, because what we hate doing is chasing and things taking longer, and hold on, we're not aligned on this and that, and what's the protocol for this, what's the protocol for that. So I think similarly, we've really enjoyed, and I think it's also one of the reasons that we're quite excited to go on that journey as well, because as we get sort of more embedded, hopefully the value that comes back as well is there. One thing I'm always interested to hear about from clinic owner perspective is, we are a done for you solution. We use technology. We have human patient coordinators in the loop as well. So it's very hands off as compared to, implementing a software solution yourself, right? And going out and getting some logins and then going to set stuff up. How has that been for you as a clinic leader, this idea that you're basically paying for a job to get done, but you don't really have your sort of hands on it in the same way. You're not in there writing up message. That sort of stuff happens for you.
Mm-hmm.
How has that experience been?
Yeah. I will say initially hard for me, because I am a bit of a control guy. But one of the things I've learned, I'm going to say with maturity, is that still I have to learn to take hands off and trust. But this is also one of the reasons why we take our time in making sure that a company that we're going to work with is in line with what we are. And once we're in line, it's a lot easier for me to sort of take the hands off. So that part, I think, was hard for me initially. But at the same time, I also recognize that our admin team don't have the capacity to do what it is that needs to be done. And because of that, having a service like Coherent to be able to come in and take care of that part for us was something that, as long as at the end of it, we're seeing the outcomes that we want, is totally worth it. Right. And allowing us to work with something that we just don't have the capacity to do. Right. One of the things that I think made that whole process smoother too is, so Virginia, who, is our office manager, she's on top of it. She's exceptionally organized. And she's very detailed. Yeah. Really detail oriented. But she thinks of things that we actually don't think of. And part of that is part of her personal history and her personal journey. And so she really is trying to make sure that the messaging and the feel and the tone of what is coming out from Coherent really matches with what we have coming out of NHRC. Right. And I have to say that Virginia is, I don't want to say this. I don't want to say she's hard to impress, because that's, but essentially she's hard to impress. Right. And she's also will tell me how she feels. Like if I ask her a question, she's pretty straight about it, even though she may kind of give you the softened version of it. But she has been very, very happy and excited about how things have gone with Coherent, right? And I do know that generally speaking, she's pessimistic about some of these things because we haven't had great experiences with other companies in the past. So for her to come and tell us that she's excited with how it's going, happy with how it's going, and pleased with how it's going, for us has been we're sitting there going like this is good. This is saying it's saying a lot coming from Virginia, because she's very particular and she cares a lot She cares a lot about the patient, she cares a lot about our staff, and she cares a lot about the business as a whole. And especially for somebody who's not an owner of the business. Right. And so the idea that she is happy as she is speaks volumes to how the interaction has gone and the implementation. So, yeah.
Well, we really appreciate that. And I will tell you, we have a few clinics that we work with where someone who is, Virginia shaped in their care and their attention to detail, in their sort of focus on the details, is on the other side of the screen or phone or whatever you want to call it. And we have internally, we have what we call our sort of person name test. Does it meet the Virginia test? Does it meet the X test? And it's been wonderful to have that sort of counter pressure to say, hold on, that's 98% good enough. It's not 100% good enough. And actually for us, we wish we heard that more from all practices that we work with, because we don't know the patients the way you know the patients. We don't have the same intimate care and connection to the business. Not that we don't care about the business, but it's obviously very different. It's a supplier relationship, not an employee relationship. The fact that someone is going to take the time to say, actually, we call it this, or you should tweak it that way, it goes a long way. It makes it very easy to work as well. So that's great to hear. Well, thank you, Geoff. We appreciate the kind words, and it's been a pleasure to work with you guys as well. And I hope that continues to be the case. And excited for more results to come.
Yeah. Yeah, us too. I will say the other part that has been really positive is that in the past, other companies that we've worked with, we would say something like, we want you to say X, Y, and Z in the process, right? Or you need to get, this piece of information. And 2 months later, we're still running into the same problem where they're not getting that piece of information. Whereas with Coherent and with Sonia, it's like, hey, we need this. And I'm going to say for the most part, it's almost like a light switch change. It's like, oh, you need X, click, and now X is happening. And that for us, especially with how Virginia and I are, it's like, we want you to do A, we told you to do A, why aren't you doing A? Right? That stuff is happening, and that adjustment is happening quite quickly, and we appreciate that from our end. So, yeah.
Great. Well, we will definitely share that feedback with Sonia and the patient coordinator teams. I know they'll be very happy to hear that, and likewise take pleasure in knowing when it needs to be A and when it needs to be B, because the only thing that's really confusing is when it's somewhere in the middle and nobody has any clue what exactly it needs to be. So yeah. Thank you, Geoff. Thank you so much for kind words. It's wonderful to have you chatting with us today, and likewise to work with NHRC. So keen to let you get back to running your clinic. We will probably wrap up there, but I'm sure continue the conversation separately. And thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And looking forward to continue to work with you guys. It's great.